This is Peter.
And this is Tom.
And you're listening to History Teachers Talking Podcast.
Now part of the Evergreen Podcast Network.
All right, this is Peter Zablocki and Thomas Reska, and welcome back to our podcast. This might be a more intense dude than you are, and you're a pretty intense dude.
I really hope you're not comparing me to this person in any way, shape, or form.
Well, no, I'm not trying to say you are this person. All right,
I thought we were friends.
All right, what are we doing? What are we doing, bro?
Well, today we're going to be looking at someone that's known in the West, a little bit differently. I guess he's known in other parts of the world. We'll get into that a little bit, but we'll be looking at Joseph Stalin, who has a different first name originally, which I'll let you pronounce today. And basically looking at Joseph Stalin, who was a dictator of the Soviet Union or the USSR from 1929 to 1953, and really transformed the Soviet Union from a peasant society to a military and industrial superpower. But he did this by really terror. And millions of his own citizens died during his reign, which was really brutal.
He was a terrible person. I think if you look at numbers of like comparing, like people always like, well, there's Hitler's a bad guy. Of course, Hitler's a bad guy. I don't think anyone's going to argue that. However, Stalin is, I mean, like we're trying to compare apples to apples here. Like Stalin is just as bad and
just as bad, if not
actually
worse.
Actually killed more of his own people than Hitler did. And that's in no way, shape, or form trying to like mellow out Hitler. Both of these guys are nuts. But I find it interesting because you're like, Stalin's known around the world, differently in different places. I mean, I think it's a pretty, there's a consensus there. Like Stalin's a...
Well, what I mean by that, like he's not well liked, but yes, he's definitely seen as being a bad dude. I guess if you look like the old way, how World War II used to be taught, like Stalin in the West.
Oh yeah, Uncle Joe, yeah.
It was like Uncle Joe, he was helping us out. So I didn't really get into all like the negative. I think that was a new narrative, not a new narrative, but a narrative that was kind of retaught. I said last 30 years or something like that, right?
And that even started in Soviet Union, and we'll get to that today. I mean, Soviet Union after he died took like a deep breath and started a process known as de-Stalinization.
Yeah, these by the rulers. Yeah, they were. Well, that gets to. We'll talk about it, but like, did he really die from what they say he died from?
Yeah, fishy stuff.
There's a lot there.
Indeed. All right, so Joseph Stalin, born Joseph Vissarionovich Jusgavili. That's his real name.
Okay, say that again.
No, that was hard.
Joseph
Vissarionovich Jusgavili. When, of course, you're going to refer to him simply as
Stalin,
which actually means
Man of Steel. Okay, so and it is reasons why he brought that up. He's not naming himself after Superman. Okay, that's not what he's doing. We'll get to like why he chose that and to present this image and stuff like that, and why if you look at picture of Stalin, his one arm is always kind of hidden away. Like there's a lot of like really crazy stuff with this guy who was so crazy. Like you said, Pete, he was born in December of 1878, which really gives you an idea of how like he was born in the 1800s.
Which, I know, like 1870s.
I knew, but like it really makes it seem the 1870s. Like wow, he was an old man by the time the war was really going on.
Yeah. Did you see that? Like he invented his own birthday because they said it was. Some believe that he was December 18th, 1878. Then other documents point to December 6th, 1878. And then basically he supposedly invented his own birthday and decided that December 21st of 1879 just seemed like the right number. So,
and he could do that because he had total control. So like whatever he wants the birthday to be, whatever he wanted, okay. It just happens. Like whatever he decides, that's what's going to happen. That's how much power this guy had, like particularly later on in his life.
Absolutely. First things first, let's get this out of the way. He was actually not born in Russia proper. He was born in a small town of Gorky in Georgia, which then was part of the Russian Empire. And actually, when he was growing up as a younger kid, as a child, he did not speak Russian. He actually spoke Georgian, which is a different dialect altogether. And he learned Russian while he started going to school later on. And therefore, they said for the rest of his life, he kind of spoke with this like Georgian-esque accent, which is interesting because people often compare him to Hitler, and like Hitler was not born in Germany either, right? Like he was Austrian. So there is a lot of comparison in this perspective of like Hitler was, I'm pure Germany, and this guy's like, I'm all about Russia, Mother Russia, Soviet Union. But both of these men were not born properly, I guess, in those two countries. So grew up super poor. We know this for a fact. Now, he had a terrible childhood.
Horrible childhood, yeah.
What do you got?
Well, a little bit about it. So when he was born, he was the only one of his children to survive past infancy. So the only one of his siblings, to survive past infancy. Most of them passed away before that. And his father was initially a cobbler.
Yeah,
and he was employed in a workshop, and it did well for a while, but then it kind of like declined. Basically, his father became an alcoholic, beat him and his mother pretty much daily.
Severely,
So
yeah.
so they just left and did like this wandering through the next decade, really, just all over the place.
They said his
Just wandering
father
through.
beat him so much, like his mother, who was a laundress, right, would literally bring him to neighbors because he was peeing blood. That's how badly the father was beating his child.
Yeah, and this is in the 1800s, so there's no like child labor laws, especially
Yeah,
in
no.
Eastern Europe. They don't have these things that are going to stop that. And even that can obviously still happen anytime, but there was no protections in place. It was just he drinks and beats his family. That's what happens.
To make matters worse for little boy Stalin, he contracts smallpox, right, as a little kid, and that leaves him with lifelong facial scars. They said his face, we don't often see it that much, especially obviously if you're looking at a lot of black and white stuff, but even the color stuff from his life, he's not photographed that close by. But they said if you got really close to him, you could see his like marked skin, that it was very much scarred from smallpox. And also, he had a certain deformity. He was a small dude, so think of this like scarred face. He was very short, and one of his arms was actually shorter than the other
Well, he got hit by a like a cart or something, right? When
when he
he
was
was
little. Yep,
yeah,
that's
at
one.
age 12, now left him with that disability in his left arm, and you'll see that in other pictures. His left arm, he's usually has it like hidden away or like it tucked his hand. I think his hand was smaller, right, than the rest of it
Yep,
than his other hand. So I usually had it tucked away in like a jacket and stuff like that. Like this is all stuff that comes out later. They didn't know about this at the time because if someone mentioned it, they somehow disappeared after that.
literally. This is the thing that always got me when I taught about Stalin to my students. As a teenager, he actually earns a scholarship to attend a seminary.
He was smart.
Yeah, he was a very smart kid, and eventually this was interesting too because as he got older, he never really finished college. So a lot of his contemporaries thought of him as like, well, this guy's not really intelligent, and that was a big understatement. He was a very intelligent dude. Yeah, he might not have been educated, so people kind of looked at his like pot face, pot marked face, and they're like, oh, this guy's just a muscle man. But no, he was a very intelligent dude. So he earns a scholarship. He attends to attend a seminary school, and he was going to study to be a priest, right? A Georgian Orthodox church priest. And his mother was ecstatic about this. However, this is where things kind of start to fall apart. Specifically for his mother's dream, because while he is at the seminary, one, he doesn't really go and take any exams. He kind of skips school a lot. But also, this is where he comes across the German social philosopher Karl Marx and his work, The Communist Manifesto. And he becomes very interested in revolutionary movement and revolutionary ideas that are expressed in the Communist Manifesto, and starts to really kind of read that stuff
Yeah.
and meets other like-minded people that are against the Russian monarchy. So this is like 1899,
Yeah,
1900,
he
and
becomes an atheist, right?
basically, yep,
He basically just goes and starts arguing with the priest all the time. So yeah, he's going against his mother's wishes here, and he really was up to this point. I guess you could say kind of like a mama's boy, right?
yeah, 100%,
Like which is very strange. Again, I guess we're doing a parallel again with Hitler, but Hitler was the same way. Like
very
if you
much
look
so.
at this early on in his life, it was all about his mother, his mother, his mother. Then when she passes away, that does things. And with Stalin, it's kind of similar too. Like they're very devoted to their mothers. And then
Yep.
but Stalin breaks away from her wishes, and he goes against the priest. So he actually argues with the priest at his school. In 1899, he gets thrown out because he doesn't show up for his exams. That's when revolutionary Stalin really starts to kick in place. And they do have pictures of Stalin as a young man, as like a teenager. Like they're out there.
Yeah,
You
it
can find them.
exists. Yeah, he's got long, wavy hair. This is crazy. No, but like he
Yeah,
does look like it's weird, like watching him like as a young guy.
like that's
Um,
Stalin. Yeah.
here's baby Stalin. And later, when you see pictures of his kids, actually his older son look very much like him, which is, I mean, I guess makes sense, right? Father son,
Just a little bit, just a little bit.
right? All right, so he leaves school and he gets involved at this time in this with this like underground political movement. This is the communist movement, and there's these communists. We have to always remember there's a Russian monarchy while this is going on, right? So you have a Russian czar, and they're kind of rule the whole nation. However, there is a lot of unrest, specifically in the labor classes, and you have a lot of labor demonstrations, strikes, so on and so forth. You have fires being set to different business owners' homes. This is what Stalin kind of becomes involved in. He becomes this political agitator, and he adopts a new name for himself before, like he becomes really Stalin. He is known as Koba, Koba. Koba
Yeah.
is a fictional Georgian outlaw hero. Think of like Robin Hood-esque, right, of Georgia, and that kind of becomes his nickname.
Well,
There you
he
go.
gets this because he's ruthless, right? I think that's even
Yep.
what Lenin calls him. He's like, this guy's ruthless. But he gets that nickname because in 1907 he steals 250,000 rubles, which is about 3.4 million US dollars today, right?
Gets
In a
in the
bank
house.
robbery. and he uses that to fund the cause. So he steals all this money, and then he uses it to fund the cause, and that's kind of he gets that Koba name, that like Robin
Robin
Hood
Hood.
type S
Yeah.
type S person, because he's stealing and he's giving it back to the cause, and he's doing bombings like you said, and this all starts during the Russian Revolution, and he's impressing Lenin at this time too, and that's going to start that relationship that they have,
Yep. Yeah,
which is
Lenin is your leader of this, at least one
Bolsheviks, yeah,
faction, the
of the
Bolsheviks.
Bolshevik Party, yeah,
And the first initial Russian Revolution, the first time this is happening is really like early 1900s, like 1902, and it failed. The first Russian Revolution failed. I mean, we know for a fact that obviously Lenin is banished from the country, and you have the Russian monarchy retains power. And what happens to Stalin is he's actually imprisoned numerous times between 1902 and 1913 for his actions. At one point, he is sent to exile in Siberia, which is also ironic because that's where he sends most of his political,
later on.
unless he kills them. Yeah, but later on, he does send a lot of his political enemies to Siberia. As we already know, the Russian gulags. You basically lived until you no longer lived, which happened very quickly. Conditions were just insane. During this time, he is this Russian revolutionary. About 1906, he marries his first wife, right?
Yeah. What's her name?
Ekaterina. So Kato?
Katerina. And she's poor family, a little bit of nobility thrown in there. And he does give birth to his first son, right?
Yep.
Yakov. What happens is right after, like you said before, Pete, that Russian Revolution doesn't go very well, so they have to leave. She actually dies of typhus in 1907.
Quickly. Yeah, very quickly.
And this really messes with him. They said he's racked with grief. It destroys him. This is when he adopts that name. This is when he adopts the name of Stalin. So he goes from whatever his name was before, right, that you said before, to Koba, right, to that nickname.
Yep.
Now he's taking in Stalin, and a lot of historians say this is because of the loss of his first wife. That's the only person that he basically did love, and losing her, he just becomes like iron, steel after this, why he adopts that name, Men of Steel. And he actually leaves his son in the care of his wife's parents. He just leaves him there, abandons him basically, and then he just devotes himself fully to this revolutionary work.
To the cause, yep.
To the cause, and during this time is when he gets arrested a bunch of times and exiled to Siberia, which is really crazy when you think about it. Because you think of how many times, again, I'm going back to Hitler too. Like Hitler gets exiled a bunch, gets arrested, right?
Well, thrown in jail, yeah.
Thrown in jail. Like how many times could these guys have just been wiped out? Like the cops could have like shot him, like beat him to death, or some prisoner could have done something to him. He could have got sick in Siberia and stuff like that. But then he just keeps on surviving, and becomes one of like the worst human beings, causing the most destruction and loss of life in the history of mankind. But in so many times, things could have just turned a different way.
Yeah. Stalin's legacy is still present. The fact that Russia is a military power is Stalin. The fact that they are an industrial power is Stalin. The fact that they sell oil and all that stuff to Europe and have Europe is really dependent on it, like that all stems and starts. Stalin does eventually get remarried, right? After the more successful Russian Revolution in 1917, he does remarry. By then, he really does not like his initial son. He kind of is like, ugh, whatever. Like he sees him as kind of like a wuss. And there's a really sad story here because obviously I'm getting ahead of myself, but Yakov, his first son from his first marriage, is eventually taken prisoner in Germany during World War II. And
that's like a famous story.
Yeah, so what happens?
Well, what is it? He's like I forget what his rank was. He gets captured, and the Germans, the Nazis, realize who he is. And they're like, all right, great. We'll offer him back to Stalin, return for some of our officers. And he's only like, I don't know, like a private. He's not worth like, in a corporal's rank. Like, no, he's dumb enough to get captured. So be it. And the Nazis kill him. Kill him. This is his own son. This was, again, years later and stuff like that. But it just shows how Stalin becomes very cold, very just calculated, very just like, he is this man of steel. Like he's not showing like emotions, basically.
He literally told the Germans, fine, kill him. I have another son.
I have other sons. Yeah. Which is like,
crazy.
But it shows his mentality.
Yeah.
Like if he's willing to do this to his own son, that's one reason, again, we'll get to it, why the Soviet Union loses so many people in World War II is really one reason for that is Stalin too.
Oh yeah.
And the tactics. So
absolutely. All right, so let's talk about his rise to power, and then we'll get into like Soviet Union under Stalin, and then we'll roll that into World War II. But 1912, Lenin is in exile. He's in Switzerland.
Yeah, he's in Switzerland.
And he kind of appoints Stalin, because Stalin's still around. He's still leading his little revolution back in Russia. So he appoints him as the first to serve on the first central committee of the Bolshevik Party. And once the Bolsheviks actually seized power in 1917, and the way they do this is because Germany is fighting a World War One, and they're fighting a two-front war, and they want Russia out of the war, and Russia's
Out of the
doing
war.
really bad in this war, and the people are poor and starving, and are starting to
It's
rebel more or
not going
less,
well. Yeah.
yeah, against the Tsar, Tsar Nicholas. So the Germans literally used their secret weapon. They put Lenin on a train and bring him back to
Yeah, that's a
Russia.
whole. I'm sure this
That's
podcast
a
out there,
pod. Yeah, that's
specials
got to
on
be.
there, just on that. The whole like return of Lenin and stuff, and how they smuggle him back in a train because they want to basically create like a civil war in Russia,
And they did. And they did.
and
They
they did.
literally
And
did that.
yeah, and if you want to hear about how the Americans got involved in that civil war,
Yeah,
shout out to one of our previous podcasts. Right?
that's
Woohoo!
right. Find our other podcast on the American expedition
Look for it.
in
Search, search,
Russia.
search.
Nonetheless, what happens here is while Lenin is brought back and restarts the Second Russian Revolution in 1917, Stalin was there taking care of stuff for him. He was laying the groundwork. There was a central committee, right, of this party. He was getting this political support and everything, the base growing. So when Lenin lands, Stalin kind of hands it back to Lenin, but people are starting to realize like Stalin has a lot of power. He remained while Lenin was banished.
Yeah.
And essentially, what starts to happen is it's not just Lenin, it's not just Stalin either. Like, while Stalin is an important dude, you actually have another dude that's kind of very important here, and his name is Trotsky, right?
Trotsky.
And so it's Stalin and Trotsky that remain when Lenin's gone, and they're the ones that kind of lead this revolution. And when Lenin comes back, this is very much an oligarchy, right? An oligarchy meaning it's a small group of people having control of a country, organization, whatever. It's not a totalitarian state under Lenin.
No, he. It's not a true communist state either. Obviously,
Yep.
it's more of a socialist state, right? United Soviet Socialist Republic. So it's going to be that first. And Stalin is appointed to the Central Committee of the Communist Party. So this role really gives him a lot of power. And what he starts to do is he starts to appoint his friends, his allies, into government jobs. And this is when he's growing out of this like political support that he's going to use later on.
Yeah, and well, you have this oligarchy, right? You have this group of people that are kind of controlling here, but he's setting himself up to become the sole replacement for Lenin.
For Lenin, yeah.
Yep. And Lenin actually sees this, and there's a document that's written that Stalin more or less kind of winds up hiding during his reign, and eventually comes
No,
out.
he doesn't trust Stalin. He thinks he's too brutal, really, to rule.
Exactly.
And Lenin was pretty brutal too himself.
Yeah, but for Lenin to be like, okay, listen, Stalin should not like get too much power. Like he is,
He can't take
could
over.
tell
Yeah.
what he's doing exactly. But that's exactly what happened. So Lenin winds up dying, and when Lenin dies,
Before,
1924,
doesn't he have a stroke or something before that?
He
He's in
does.
like bad health, and like you always see pictures of Stalin with him, and Stalin kind of isolates Lenin from everybody else, and like he can only talk to me. So
Yep.
he would say Lenin told me this, Lenin told me that, and that's what Stalin's telling people. And obviously we know today that probably wasn't true. Stalin was just kind of using Lenin as a puppet, and they find that letter where I think he does want Trotsky to be in power after
Lenin
dies.
does. Lenin
Right?
Lenin wanted
Lenin wants
Trotsky.
Trotsky, and then Trotsky winds up getting an ice pick to the skull.
Literally.
Somehow. Why is it? I think he's hiding in Mexico when that happens.
Yeah,
right?
he banishes him to like Mexico, and then he has him killed with an ice pick, and then he erases Trotsky from all of
everything.
You guys have
The
to
pictures,
understand. Yeah, like today it's like nothing. You could literally erase someone.
This
with
is
a camera.
Photoshop back in 1930s. Yeah,
Exactly.
1920s.
He photoshopped him basically in 1920s. He had every official state document, every official state picture that had Trotsky in it. He had Trotsky like physically erased from the picture, which like technology wise, you're like, how did they do in 1920s? Well, they did it. They touched up photos. And basically Trotsky, the to-be leader and successor of Lenin, just disappeared from Russian history, or I should say now Soviet history. And Stalin, as you said, because he was getting all these people in government, kind of starts to absorb the power, and the oligarchy kind of changes, into more of a totalitarian state.
Stalinism, right? They look back at this now, and this is really becomes becomes Stalinism. And by the late 1920s, he's a dictator of the Soviet Union. That's what that's what it is.
Yep.
And I guess if you watch old newsreels, they talk about this, and they're still trying to project. The Soviet Union is still trying to project it. It's like this workers' paradise, right? That it's such a great place to be. But by this time, too, like some stuff is coming out, right? Some people are realizing things. They're like, it's not this utopia, and Stalin is not really like this nice guy that.
Yeah, he's not really a communist. He's a totalitarian.
But he's a dictator. He's not this revolutionary that wants to free everybody. And what they do here is the main thing is that they do centralize a lot of the economy, this forced collectivization on particularly agriculture. when the government
Yep.
took control of farms, and that leads to a lot of issues
Yep.
in Russia.
Yeah, so the big thing here is that Stalin wants to turn Russia, which is literally almost complete an agrarian society, into a domineering big industrial power. To do that, he needs money. And he's going to use the Soviet Union's agriculture to gain that money. In other words, as you said, Tom, he basically created these massive collectives. There were no like his 5 year plans, where
Yeah.
he would take over government ownership of all private land, farmland, and pull kind of these farms into these collectives where all of the grain and all of the stuff that was grown was collected and then sold for export by the state. Therefore, all the money was going to the state, not the people that actually grew this stuff. And then, as opposed to that money that's being sold from this, like, on steroids farming, that money doesn't go back to the people. That money is used then to industrialize the nation. So the creation of more steel production, oil, factories, so on and so forth. None of that stuff is producing
Food. People need
food.
food.
But yeah, food, but also consumer products. It's not even it's producing military weapons. It's producing more industry. It's like industry is producing more industry. Factories are producing more factories. Nothing for the consumer. This is his plan of ultimately strengthening Soviet Union. And you have to give him credit. Like, he does do that. I mean,
Well, it's also to ensure his power too. He wants
of
to make sure
course.
his power is going to be there because he's ruling by terror, right? It's a total totalitarian power. He's eliminating anyone who might go say anything against him,
Yep.
right? He has secret police going around. He's encouraging citizens to spy on each other. He has people sent to the gulags, right? Those forced labor camps. He has a
Yep.
bunch of people killed, and this is all happening. And while the Great Depression is kind of going on in the rest of the world, right?
Yep.
This is what's going on there. So the Soviet Union is kind of isolated. I don't believe they get affected quite as bad as a lot of like the Western powers do
Oh, yeah,
and
but they
stuff
have their
like
own
that.
famines.
That's what I'm not saying it's good. They're dealing with their own stuff. So you
Yeah,
have the famines, you have everything else going on, but they're not really getting thrown in with everything else that's going on with the Great
that's
Depression.
true.
And then during the 30s too, he has a great purge, which is these campaigns to rid the Communist Party, the military, and other parts of the Soviet society from anything he considered a threat. So if Stalin considered you a threat, you were dead. So
Yep.
what he's getting is all these yes men that will never question him, that will never doubt him, that won't even like say it to anybody else. And this is going to wind up hurting them in the beginning of the war of World War II when we get to that part,
Yep.
because he's creating this what's basically called the cult of personality, right? For everyone knows that song, the cult of personality. And I think Stalin's name's even mentioned in that. And you have cities named in his honor, history books were rewritten to give him a more prominent role. They put him into pictures. He was never even there originally.
Yep.
So talking
Yep.
about other people get taken out, if he's put into, they like mythologize a lot of his life, making up these things, kind of like what you hear about today, but like in North Korea, where
Oh,
like
very much so.
the leader there always gets like a hole in one and stuff like that. Even I guess you can even say a bit with well, no, not a bit with Russia today with Putin. A lot of the stuff like when he plays hockey, somehow he scores a goal every time. And stuff like that, or that he shot this tiger was attacking some city, like inside, and he went and killed the tiger. The tiger was tranquilized in their trap when Putin killed it, but it was still like, oh, Putin save the tiger. So things like that.
Yep, and I kind of want to stay a little bit here with these great purges. I mean, when you think about it, right, this is a political campaign ultimately to eliminate any dissenting members of the Communist Party, and
Yeah, but a lot of these
um,
people were like intellectuals, like
yeah,
they
like
were
smart
people you want.
Russians.
Yeah,
Estimates vary, obviously, but most experts agree on the fact that probably about 750,000 people were executed during the Great Terror between 1936 and 1938, and right, more than a million survivors were sent to these forced labor camps. Great Terror started, right, with the assassination of Sergei Kirov, who was a prominent Bolshevik leader. Kirov is murdered at the Communist Party headquarters by a guy that's actually hired by Stalin to do that. He ordered the hit. Stalin uses Kirov's death, saying, like, you know what, we need to launch a purge because there's a dangerous conspiracy within this Communist Party.
he's
And
doing it by fear.
yeah, that's how he justifies it to the Soviet people. Like, I'm just purging the unclean communists, the so-called corrupt communists from this, which is
Yeah, I'm just
nuts.
making it better for everybody else.
I read a book about Stalin called "In the Court of the Red Tsar," and it was the most intense. And I mean that not just because of the content, but because the thing was like 1,500 pages with tiny print. Tom, I'm telling you, it never took me that long to read any other book than this book. It got to the point; it was very much like a witch hunt. people would point other
Yeah.
people out to meet quotas. Stalin was like, I think I need another 100. There should be at
Well,
least
yeah, because
another 10,000 people that are bad from this area. They're like, okay, we'll find 10,000 people. We'll
yeah,
kill
that's what it
them.
was. Because he just knew that oh no, there has to be people out there, and he's also doing it for fear. Like if you're seeing that many people getting round up, getting killed, getting just disappearing, that other people they're going to keep their mouth shut. And you knew
Yeah.
you just don't say anything to anybody because it's going to come back to you. And even people, I mean, I'm sure there's people who got killed who said nothing to anybody. They just
Yep.
got in a fight with a neighbor and they said this is a way we can get back at them. Just say,
Nuts.
oh yeah, he said something bad about Stalin. Like, oh, all right, you're with me. They probably take out other person too. Well, you heard what he said bad about Stalin, so you're coming with us also.
All right, so let's look into World War II. Right, it's like the next chapter of Stalin. That's the one that
Some
Americans know probably the most about.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is when probably the average American gets introduced to Stalin because they probably don't even know that much about him before then, I would say,
yep, yep,
especially in the
absolutely.
30s. Like they might hear about if they're not following newspapers or they're not even in newspapers, you're not going to see that much about him, but
Nope.
everything else is going on. But I'm sure they have to be aware of it. The one thing they probably do hear about Stalin during this time is in 39 is when the German Soviet non-aggression pact is signed, right? When
Yeah, he's a
Stalin
bad guy. He starts this war as a bad guy.
well, he's a bad guy regardless. He doesn't end the war as a good
Well,
guy. But
yeah.
yes, I know you're saying. But he starts on the side with the Nazis, which a lot of I guess doesn't really get whitewashed, but people are aware of it. But I guess years ago it wasn't really used as they didn't really talk about it quite as much. They
Yeah.
have this non-aggression pact, and that's when everyone knows this war is going to happen. Because up to this point, a lot of people are expecting there to be an actual war between Germany and Soviet Union because they do not like each other. Their
No.
ideologies go totally against each other. They do not like each other. Germany still wants to, get back at Russia for World War I, and Russia wants to get back at Germany from World War
Germany.
One. So
Yeah.
you still have that whole idea, and they basically it's a secret pact, right? They agree to annex parts of Poland, which both sides don't like the fact that that's there. Sorry, Pete.
Yeah, you have the Germans attack in September on one side, and all the Poles are fighting and trying to maneuver and like go further east. And while they're going east, they're meeting a bunch of Poles that are evacuating the eastern side. And they're like, "Wait, what are you evacuating for?" And they're like, "Well, the Russians have attacked from the other side." It's like, what? What? And they don't just attack Poland, right? Like, Tom, what else? I mean, they get a
Oh,
bunch of them.
they're attacking Romania. They're attacking Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He also launched an invasion of Finland at this time. So he's going all out. He wants to take all that whole area. He wants to expand this sphere of the Soviet Union. And he really wants these too, particularly like Poland and stuff, so that Germany, he wants to expand that border between the USSR and Germany. So there's like, they have to go through other states. This is something that he does during the Cold War too, right? They want those
Yeah.
satellite countries so that if there is a World War III, that they have to fight through before they get to the heart of Russia itself, the main motherland part of it. They're not fully allied. They're not really doing like joint operations, right,
Yeah.
or anything like that. They're just kind of like, all right, you take part of Poland, you take those countries. We're going to focus on France. Russia was not getting involved in the fight against France, so it wasn't like a strict military alliance. It was more of a non-aggression pact, right? You don't fight me, we don't fight you. But even Stalin signs this expecting that he's going to betray Hitler. Like that was his plan.
Yeah.
Like neither side knew that they thought this was going to last very long. It just lasted a lot shorter than Stalin thought it was going to last. And there's a lot of
Well,
reasons for that to
well,
happen.
yeah. Essentially, what happens is in June 1941, Germany breaks the Nazi-Soviet pact, invades the Soviet Union. Stalin was actually warned about this. I mean, the
Yeah, by the
Americans, the
Americans, by the
British.
British. Wasn't there also a there was a German defector I read recently, this came out, that actually came over, crossed the lines and said, listen, they're going to invade. And Stalin reportedly had him killed. They're like, do you want to learn more about this guy? You want to hear what he has to say? And Stalin said, no, kill him. And like 2 days later,
The Germans come.
the Germans attacked. And they were not prepared for war. And according to like I guess history, is that Stalin locks himself in his room and doesn't come out for like three or 4 days. Did you hear
Yeah,
this?
yeah, I did.
Because
That's
he's
everyone always says that because he's shocked. He can't believe that this
because
just
he
happened.
because he thought this is it. Like you got to understand at this point, Germany is undefeated.
Oh,
I mean,
most powerful country in the world.
you can argue about the Battle of Britain, but like on land they're undefeated. They have technology that the Russians have no clue that how to combat. Right, with the tanks and the blitzkrieg. Right, they marching all through Europe, and the fact that they're invading and they're doing when they invade, they're getting deep into Russia pretty quickly. Like the blitzkrieg is still working for quite some time in the beginning of this war against the Soviet Union, particularly in the summer months, right?
Yep.
So Stalin's just like, we're done. He's like, I'm done. That's it. We're over.
Until Stalin goes Stalin and tells his people basically what?
Yeah.
Do what? How do you stop the
Well,
how do you stop the Germans?
you're fighting to the last person. That's really basically what he does. So as the German troops are like they're getting closer, actually approaching Moscow, Stalin remained there and directed this like scorched earth defense policy, basically destroy anything
Destroy,
and
yeah.
retreat deeper and deeper. He's really going to what the Russians did when they fought Napoleon,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Like scorch earth, go back, and that's what Russia does because they're really, which is going to try to last until you know winter.
Winter.
But really,
Yeah, just get him closer and get him deeper and get him
yeah,
deeper in. But
because what you're doing is you're stretching those supply lines. You're making,
yeah,
and you're not leaving anything for them to use. And really, the turning point is something that I know people have asked, and I think we've even discussed maybe doing a podcast just on this at some point. Right, the
yeah,
Battle of Stalingrad. When it comes to battles in World War II, it really is the battle,
yeah, 100%.
like a land battle at least. It lasts from August of 42 to February of 43, house to house, room to room in the house's battle.
Or the
Right, like
symbolism here is this is
this
the
is
city
just
that's
horrible.
named after Stalin.
And that's why Hitler wants it. So again, it's showing that power struggle between the two. They don't really. I mean, it has some strategic value on the Volga River,
It
but there's
does,
other
yeah.
ways. There's other ways that
Could
Hitler
have
could
went
have
around
got.
it. They could have
He
went
could have
around
went around it. He could have just laid siege to it. He could have went around it. And Stalin could have abandoned it, but he made the people stay. Stalin wants it because it's named after him, right? And then Hitler wants it because it's named after Stalin. This is his city. So this is becoming this battle where I think like 1 million civilians die. Like I remember there was a movie that came out not too long ago called Stalingrad. It's a Russian movie. It's really like Russian patriotic. I remember
It popped up on
seeing
Amazon
parts
for
of it.
me a couple times. I
Yeah,
haven't seen
I
it,
think
but
it's there. I remember it coming out. I remember us talking about it. Like, oh, we should go see it. we did.
there's a
But
German movie called Stalingrad from like '93 that does like it's very
it's a
similar to
German's
like All
perspective,
Quiet on the Western Front
Western
because
Front.
to them that was like the All Quiet on the Western Front in World War II for them. Like
Yeah,
this was bad
yeah,
for the young Germans that were sent to Stalingrad. The thing that we also need to bring up here is that the scorched earth policy. Stalin basically said like if you have pigs, kill them. If you have fields, burn them. Like if you don't, we'll do it for you. Like
yeah. Leave nothing, and they did,
leave
and they
nothing.
did.
Yeah.
They did. Like there's that scene in the old movie. It's an old movie, not that old, but Enemy at the Gates. I'm sure
Did
you
you
saw
say
that,
old
right?
movie? That's like 2000 something.
2001, 2002. Enemy at the
Probably. Yeah, it's
Gates.
like 20 years old. Yeah.
But in it, it's very accurate, and I could also that deals with Stalingrad too, I believe, right? They're just kicking people off the boat, kicking soldiers off the boat, throwing them into the battle, and they're giving every other soldier a gun because they don't have enough rifles.
Yeah.
And they're just saying, all right, when the person in front of you gets shot and killed, you pick up their gun and keep on moving forward.
Yeah.
And
So
then they
here's
had,
ammo. You just got ammo.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then there's actually people behind them with machine guns. So behind the Soviet soldiers, so if they retreat, they get shot. Like these are Stalin's orders. So like you had to push forward, you had to keep on fighting because you had no other choice. Because if you went backwards at all, there were people,
There were really Russians set up to shoot you if you turned
to
around.
shoot you if you retreated. That was their job.
That's
You
crazy.
don't retreat. That's one reason why the death toll just becomes so much. But that's really shows Stalin's mindset.
Yeah, Russia had a lot of people. Not that it's okay to kill them, but like this guy really.
Well, that was their greatest resource. He realized that was their greatest resource.
Yeah.
They can just keep on pumping more and more people into the fight, and just they're not going to beat the Germans instantly, but they're going to wear them down, which is really what they do.
So let's kind of finish up the war aspect here. What we need to point out here is no real historian is going to argue otherwise that Russia is the reason that the war continued and Hitler didn't win. Because
Especially in the land war, yeah. It ended what it did and having that stuff because he does join the Allies do join them.
Yeah.
Roosevelt extends Lend-Lease. They always say this. They said that the war was won with British intelligence, right? American weapons, American industry, and Russian lives.
Yep.
That's how World War II was basically won. And you do have the big three, Churchill, Stalin, and Roosevelt do meet, right? Particularly at the Tehran conference.
Yep, and the Alta.
And Churchill never liked Stalin.
No. Churchill hated Stalin. Except FDR actually was like, all right, I got to get Stalin on my side. Like, because he's like, Stalin's the only one that's fighting in this war right now. And until we like hit up D-Day in Normandy and like really join this war effort, we need Stalin to be happy. He's like, all right, how do I get Stalin to be happy? I'll make fun of Churchill, who's my friend, by the way. Like, Churchill was PO'd. Yeah. He was like, dude, why are you making fun of me? And basically FDR's strategy was like, I got to get on the good side of Stalin.
Yeah, and Stalin would laugh.
Yeah.
And then that would go. Because FDR always thought he could handle Stalin. That's why you kind of read with it, in all those writings that he didn't trust Stalin necessarily, but he knew Stalin needed him and needed American industry. And he would basically he felt like he could control Stalin or know how to manage Stalin.
No one can control Stalin.
Well, that was FDR's thought process. Anyway, I'm sure Stalin thought he was doing the same thing to FDR. And then in Churchill's there, he's like, both these guys are getting on my nerves.
Exactly. I mean? Literally. Like, where's my cigar? So, what essentially happens at the very last, months of the war, we know FDR dies. Truman becomes president. Truman does not like Stalin. But this
Doesn't
by this
trust at
time,
all.
yeah, by this time we're this is the beginning of a new war because when Stalin's forces were fighting the Germans from the east, in the Eastern Front, they basically started liberating all these Eastern European countries that Germany had taken. And Soviet Union's version of liberating them, it really means taking them over and turning them into communist countries. And in these countries, we're talking about kind of what you mentioned before, right? Like you have the Estonia, you have Poland, and as far as really half of Germany, where the Soviets meet the Americans in Berlin, by then, Stalin's forces have made their way through all of Eastern Europe. The US allied forces, US and British forces, make their way to Germany from Western Europe. There's almost this like unwritten understanding that all these countries, once this war ends in like a month, right, in 45,
They
all
knew the
these
same thing. Yeah.
countries are going to be given back to the people, rightfully so, to the people that own these countries. There are going to be elections that are going to be held, and there's these democratic elections will choose new leaders. And France, who was Vichy France, half of it was, pro-Nazi. It's all going to go back to pre-war normal. The problem is that Stalin is like, yeah, I'll hold elections in Poland. Yeah, I'll hold elections in the other side of Germany, and I'll hold elections here, but he doesn't. And the reason for that is because he kind of looks at history and he goes, all right, Germany has attacked Russia multiple times. He looks at it as like, I need Poland as a buffer zone. And I'm not going to let Polish people hold democratic elections because the Polish people clearly are not going to vote in a communist government because, I kind of like invaded them and killed a bunch of Poles in World War II. So that's not going to happen. So he, to keep that buffer zone, refuses to allow these elections, which angers the Western world. And in 46, you have Churchill comes to the United States, to Missouri, to visit Truman, and he gives his famous speech where he says, an iron curtain
On curtain.
has fallen across Europe. Like Stalin is not giving these countries back. And what he does is he establishes puppet communist governments.
Yeah, they're loyal to Stalin, so he's basically increasing his subjects more or less, right,
Yep.
in these areas, and he's having this sphere of influence, and the Soviet Union gets bigger, and even stuff comes out later about like what the Soviets did during the war as they were like taking over these territories, and Stalin refuses to punish anybody. He's just basically like, how could you expect them to react normally? What's so awful about them doing these things, like the rape, the pillaging, the looting, and stuff like that? He's like, what do you want them to do?
Like what happened in Berlin in the very last month of the war in Europe. I mean, when the Soviets got to Berlin, Stalin basically was like, you know what? Spoils of war, have fun.
Yeah,
Every
destroy.
woman, regardless of age, was raped by Soviet soldiers. You have the buildings were destroyed, completely utterly destroyed. I mean, people say like, wow, Germans are terrible. But then you look at what Soviets did. But what's interesting, though, is Soviets at this point were the good guys. You know what I mean? Like the good guys are not supposed to do that stuff.
Yeah, I mean they did liberate a lot of the concentration camps, right?
They
With
did,
we
yeah.
can that's something we can talk about. They see that, and that's when some of this early stuff first gets out. And they were liberated. I'm sure it wasn't every single Soviet soldier, but it did happen, and it happened on a pretty large scale.
Yep.
And you didn't see that as much. I'm sure it did happen with Americans and British and French soldiers too, but again, not on that scale. It
Yeah.
wasn't like, and it wasn't encouraged by the
Yeah, it
leader.
wasn't like given free
It
reign.
wasn't like, "Hey, do it. Why are you not doing it?"
Yeah, yeah.
That sort of stuff. So, and that's one of the reasons that there's many others, but also why the Soviets wanted to be involved in occupation of Japan, and Truman's like, "No, that is not happening."
Yep.
And that's really causes a lot of the attitude and stuff with Truman and Stalin, how they don't like each
I mean,
other. That's going to
Stalin is
go
the
from
one that
there.
encouraged North Korea to attack South Korea.
Yeah,
He
when you
was
get to
he
that
was like,
part,
"Go
yeah,
for it. You have my blessing."
you have my
Which
blessing.
which
Yeah,
which again, tens of thousands of American soldiers lose their lives just 5 years after World War II. Essentially, this establishes, we kind of all know, establishes the Cold War, which lasted until 1990 between the Soviet Union and the Western world. Soviet Union and their satellite countries, or the Warsaw Pact countries, is what they're called in Eastern Europe. Stalin doesn't really live that much longer.
no, he gets some
Um,
pretty poor health as a few years later. Like he has a few issues. I guess one of the last big things he does with the West directly, I would have to say, would be the Berlin airlift. Right, everything going on
yeah,
with that and blockading the beginning of the Berlin Wall, which is something I think we did do a podcast on the Berlin
we
Wall
did a
coming down,
podcast
right?
on that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
Berlin.
you were there. But
Yep.
video
Little
of little Pierre Touche on the wall.
there is. Well,
Right,
not on the
there
wall,
you go.
but by the wall, hanging out.
We'll just go with that. We'll just go with
The
that.
western side, the eastern side, you couldn't get near that thing, man. It was like an inner wall, Stalin's
Yeah.
grass, which had like spikes. Needless to say, what happens here? He also brings the Soviet Union to a nuclear age. That's important as well. Russia, no question, undoubtedly under Stalin becomes a world power. Such a world power that actually its industry is only beat by United States industry. Its military is only beat, right, arguably, by United States military. The two countries are head to head, nose to nose when Stalin dies. Then things kind of change afterwards. And the reason for that is because when Stalin dies, which we'll get into in a second how that happens, he died on March 5th,
March,
1953.
yeah,
Yeah, he was 74 years old. He had a stroke. Once he dies, at first there's almost like that Stalin everywhere, and what they do is they embalm him and they bring him next to Lenin, and they put his body there on display as well, and it's on display for till like 61 or something. Like it's there basically for almost 10 years. People are still afraid of Stalin, even though the dude's been dead, right, for at this point I think
yeah.
8 years. They're afraid of saying anything bad about him until you finally have Nikita Khrushchev, who's he becomes the successor, until he's finally like, okay, you know what? Like maybe everything Stalin did was like not great. And even then, people are paranoid. They're like, whoa, like this is 8 years later. They're still afraid of a man that's been dead for 8 years because they're afraid of
That's his cult of personality. Yeah,
exactly. But then in 61, they're like, you know what? Let's just remove this guy from the Red Square, the mausoleum. You don't need to see his body in an open glass casket. They basically started the process of de-Stalinization, and they buried him. It's like, you don't see him anymore. Meanwhile, Lenin is still there. But when he died from a stroke, this is kind of, they said that it was almost, did he die from stroke?
well, yeah, it's one of those things. Well, they found him. They said he had cerebral hemorrhage, right, on
Yep.
March 1st, 1953, and he was in bad health for a while before this. From 1946 until his death, he only gave 3 speeches
Yep.
publicly. And even his writings declined. So he wasn't in great health. He didn't trust doctors. He thought a lot of doctors were trying to kill him. He actually had a couple doctors that he thought tried to kill him, tortured until they confessed they were trying to kill him, and then he had them killed.
And
So
they were Jewish.
those
It was
assumptions.
actually,
Yeah, they were Jewish doctors, yeah.
it was Jewish doctors. Yep.
Which is weird because the Soviet Union was actually one of, if I think it might have been the first country to like recognize Israel,
Yep.
because he wanted to have like a
Maybe.
strong. He was one of the first ones. He wanted to have a strong presence in the Middle East, and then it kind of fell out very quickly because Israel sided with the West, with the United States more, and then Stalin became very
Super anti-Semitic towards the end.
anti-Semitic at that point. Yeah, and promoting a lot of that
Yeah, he
in the
started
Soviet
Jewish purges
Union.
in between
Yeah,
51 and 53. He also okayed a lot of publications and the media to become anti-Semitic. And it basically started talking about threats of Zionism and threats of Jewish people that need to be condemned. And a lot of it stemmed from also, he always uses one thing. He's like, well, there's a doctor's plot. There's these Jewish doctors that are very smart and they're high up in the Communist Party and they're trying to actually, assassinate Soviet leaders. So he uses that as an example, or rather as an impetus to why he's now going after Jewish people. But this never really comes to fruition or really goes as far as it could because he is found dead from this stroke. And when he's found dead from the stroke, actually, this is a interesting story because he wouldn't come out of his room, and everyone was afraid of going in
afraid to
there.
go see him. Yeah, so they find him a couple days later.
Yeah, they might have
Right?
actually saved him if they walked in that morning, but they're like, I'm not disturbing, Comrade Stalin. They
And
had
they
the maid
basically
run.
go in, yeah, and they found him on the floor,
Yeah.
like wrapped up in his blankets, all like filth all over him and stuff like that. And they basically, all right, we have to help him now. So they moved him to the couch. He lived for a few more days. They like spoon fed him, gave him medicines, covered him with leeches and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it was apparently a brutal death. He never really regained full functions, and he winds up dying on March 5th. And then it's announced March 6th that he died, and that kind of like shocks the world. There's I saw this one picture of actually that's like by a camera by a U.S. Army assistant who happened to be there. And he's able to just barely get a picture of Stalin's casket. And there's a lot of talk, like you said before, of him that he was poisoned. There are several people that they say could have poisoned Stalin different ways, and there's never been proof. New York Times had published a report a couple of years ago that he was poisoned by warfarin, which is this intense poison. But when he dies, though, people actually die coming to see him. The crowds are so large that they get trampled.
Well, they're paranoid. Like
So
they're
yeah,
been
they,
taught.
they know they
Yeah.
have to show their mourning for him, and
Yeah.
people actually die getting trampled. Like it's officially reported as 109, but other reports say it's over 1,000 people that got killed this way.
That's crazy. Which just basically adds, I mean, it adds to his number. Again, this is such a big window. Um, because historians still can't agree. It's one of like when you call a cable company will be between 7 and 4. Like, oh,
Yeah,
thanks for the window. They say that Stalin's responsible for the deaths of anywhere between 6 to 20 million people during the entire duration of his rule. I mean, that's a big window there. Even if we meet in the middle, right? I mean, you're still talking millions of people. The Soviet Union after Stalin, after when Khrushchev comes to power, it switches because Stalin was a totalitarian leader. He was, by every definition, a dictator. And after Stalin's death, Russia, or Soviet Union, I should say, returns back to this oligarchy, right? Like the communist state once again rules. It's a group of people. From that point forward, every time you have a premier, a Soviet premier, he's like the head or like a representative of the Communist Party, Politburo. Not like Stalin. Stalin had the final say. From that point forward until 1989, 1990, when communism falls and you have democratic elections in Soviet Union, which reestablishes Russia, you have the rule of the party. Now, I wouldn't say, do you have any fun facts about Stalin? But like, do you have any interesting facts we
Well,
could finish
there's
up
a
with?
lot of, I guess he's known for a lot of his quotes.
Okay.
And there's some that are credit to him that he probably didn't say. But this one that I think of pretty much he did say was death is a solution to all problems. No man, no problem.
Eh.
Which is like a very, like, again, these are taken from Russian, translated. But like, I think we covered a lot of like the crazy ones that
Well,
he had, the
I
things
have
that
a
he did.
couple
But,
that deal with his kids that we
oh
did
yeah,
not
the
cover
kids.
because he did remarry again in 1918, and when he remarried, he wound up having two more kids with his second wife. A lot of people don't talk about his second wife committed suicide. It was so hush hush through the whole process that like, did she actually commit suicide or like did
Yeah, did
Stalin have
he?
something to do with it? Because she was in her early 30s when that happened. Stalin had two children with her. However, a lot of historians say that he also fathered several other children out of wedlock. So for all we know, there's a bunch of little Stalins
Yeah,
out
it's
there.
probably, but they knew that he did some, but he'd never really acknowledged them,
Yep.
like
I mean, but yeah, but think about it. These people
his
could still be
legitimate
alive
children.
today. Like, oh, actually, it's a big
Oh yeah.
secret. My father, like, it's nuts. But his children, the boy does go into and join the Air Force. He joins the Soviet Air Force, but he gets extremely depressed and he actually commits suicide as well. His only daughter later on causes huge scandal. In 1967, she defects to the United States.
Oh yeah, she comes here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's like,
I did see that.
height of the Cold War, she's like, yeah, I'm going to the United States. Svetlana was her name. She went to the United States. And that in itself was like,
Oh yeah, it's
wow.
huge. Like imagine if like a
Talk about
president's
PR.
daughter
Talk about a
went and
PR coup. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
like a big move.
she was always like kind of like a rebellious child, but after she came here, she spoke a lot about her father from a way that a lot of people didn't know. She did change her last name from Stalina, because that used to be that, to Aliueva. It was her mother's maiden name. At one point, they said that she fell in love with somebody, but the state, the communist state, like interfered with her affairs and wouldn't let her marry this guy because he was Indian, and you can't fall in love with someone that's not like a pure Russian. So she's like, screw this, I'm leaving, and she came to the U.S. They did talk about trying to assassinate her, the Soviets, but it never came to fruition. She did embrace American culture. She wrote a lot. She loved Thanksgiving. You know, that became one of her favorite holidays. The irony in all this is nuts. But anyway, so I mean, you got anything else? I think that's pretty much covers
Well,
it.
yeah, I think it sums it up. Like he was just one of those guys that, as you look at history, he was very influential. Like you can say that you're not going to argue that, and it was in a bad way for the most part. But he was very influential in the 20th century.
Stalin. Oh,
We
yeah.
missed so much. Like obviously, this we're just kind of giving like a quick hit here, but like we can go in more details with his arm and with the pictures, and if someone looked at him the wrong way, obviously everything with Hitler in World War II, just with his family. So yeah, this is just like a quick synopsis on Stalin, the man, some of the things he does, and we kind of like fast forward, his life after the war. Endless amount of information on him out there.
Anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in once more to our podcast. We do appreciate it. If you guys need to find us, you can find us at www.historyteacherstalkingpodcast.com. We are there to answer any of your questions. Do not forget to click that subscribe button or like button, guys. We really do appreciate those. And leave us a review whenever you get a chance. Those are always nice. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next week.
Stay safe, everybody.
I hope everyone enjoyed our podcast, and if you would like to email us, you can do so at historyteacherspodcast@gmail.com.